All right. Hello, everybody. People coming in. Welcome to Letterform Archives Online Edition. I'm Grendel, and I'm Education Director at Letterform Archive, which is also the home of Type West, our School of Type Design. And we have an international audience today, so please type in where you're coming from in the chat so we can see. And if you have questions for our speaker, please put them in the Q&A and upvote the questions that you want to see answered. And also, if you don't mind, when you drop your location in the chat, let us know what brought you here today. I want to give a big shout out to Skilla Zaccolini, who's doing the behind the scenes work here to make this lecture series happen. Thank you so much, Skilla. Okay, our current exhibition features typographic messages of protest, and this amazing and powerful exhibition, Strike Through, features historical and contemporary political graphics and was curated by Silas Monroe and Stephen Coles. And this will be up for a little while longer, so if you're in town, don't miss it. Next in our Letterform lecture series, we hope you can join us online for this smackdown between Laura Meseguer, who's a world-renowned type designer, and Uriol Miró, who is one of the best calligraphers in the Iberian Peninsula. Spoiler, they're actually buddies, but that doesn't mean we won't see some blood when he gets calligraphy on her type design and vice versa. Letterform Archive is the home of Type West. If you are looking to expand your typographic toolbox, or maybe you're a graphic designer who just wants to take your type skills to the next level, applications for our 2023 certificate program have now closed, but don't despair. We are planning some great public workshops for 2023, including our signature 10-week short course in type design that'll be starting at the end of January. So stay tuned for that. So for more information on upcoming Letterform lectures and workshops as they happen, or to register for anything, go to letarc.org/events, or even better, consider becoming a member of Letterform Archive. Stay in the loop and get some great perks. And last but not least, be sure to follow us on Instagram to stay on top of upcoming events and programs. Okay, welcome to Letterform Lectures 2022. Letterform Lectures are co-presented by the Letterform Archive and SFPL Special Collections. Letterform Archive is a nonprofit institution housing over 100,000 works of graphic design history. We are dedicated to making the art and the craft of the letterform radically accessible to all. We'd like to thank Adobe for generously sponsoring the video recording of this lecture series. You can view all Letterform lectures online soon after they happen. Just check our website, letterformarchive.org. Okay, we are so excited to welcome the renowned scholar and researcher, Tasheka Arceneaux Sutton, who will lead us through the brilliant works of Louise E. Jefferson, who is a Black woman cartographer, calligrapher, illustrator, graphic designer, and author. Arceneaux Sutton is an associate professor of design and creative technologies at the University of Texas in Austin and faculty at Vermont College of Fine Arts. That's a hell of a commute, Tasheka. She is the principal of Black Voice Design Studio and is co-author of the book Black Design in America, which will be released in the fall of 2023. And she is also a contributor to the book Baseline Shift, The Untold Stories of Women in Graphic Design. I asked Tasheka for an interesting anecdote, and she told us of a time when she was in New Orleans, dressed up as a zombie bride, as one does, and she attempted a show-stopping roundhouse kick in her brains-encrusted wedding dress. and she doesn't recommend trying this at home. Okay, so without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to Tasheka Arceneaux Sutton. Take it away, Tasheka.
Thank you, Brenda. And the reason I don't suggest doing that is because when I went to do that kick, I slipped and fell, but I was okay. It was funny. I just want to say that I welcome and thanks Sutter Farm Archive for having me, and those of you who have joined for the Calligraphy and Typography of Louise E. Jefferson. I just have a couple of disclaimers before I get started. One is that I'm a type enthusiast and not a type expert, which means that some of the terminology and the things I discussed, please forgive me if I have any inaccuracies in my pronunciation or usage of typographic terms and jargon. And if, some of the information, there are some holes in them. And so if you want to fill in any of those holes, if you know, like, oh, I know that this is this particular typeface, a font that's being used, go ahead, you can put it in the chat. I will not be offended. I welcome info. And the other thing I want to say, just to sort of get context, that part of this presentation is about sort of showing the different connections and threads and how Louise E. Jefferson used typography. It's also about maybe this presentation help you think about different ways that you can do your own sort of research into a particular person's body of work, as well as maybe inspiration. The other purpose of this presentation is, as always, I'm trying to uplift Black women in graphic design whose stories have been overlooked and untold. So, first, share my screen. So Louise E. Jefferson, as Grenda already mentioned, was an artist, a calligrapher, cartographer, designer, photographer, researcher, and writer. She was born in 1908 in Washington, D.C., and her father, who was a calligrapher for the United States Treasury Department, encouraged her to draw at an early age. As a child, she received advice from her parents to learn more than one thing well. Learn many things is what they told her. And from my perspective, I think Jefferson definitely heeded her parents' advice with the many talents and skills that she had. I also want to say that lots of times I use the initials LEJ to refer to Louise E. Jefferson. And I also want to, before I get into things, give a shout out to the Amistad Research Center that's located on the campus of Tulane University in New Orleans. That's where I've done the majority of my research on Louise E. Jefferson and her work. So Jefferson studied fine arts at Hunter College and graphic arts at Columbia University. While in New York, Jefferson helped to found the Harlem Artists Guild, which is an organization that is dedicated to encouraging and supporting Black artists. Augusta Savage, Aaron Douglas, Selma Berg, and Jacob Lawrence were among others who were members of the Guild. Jefferson scraped money up by doing freelance work around the city in New York until a project with the National Council of Churches turned into a full-time position as an artistic director of Friendship Press, the publishing branch of the council. Jefferson was the first African-American woman in the publishing industry to hold such an important position. She first started working at Friendship Press around like 1935, 36. And 6 or 7 years later is when she became the art director. While working at Friendship Press, Jefferson continued to do freelance work, creating materials for publishing companies, socially minded organizations such as the NAACP and the National Urban League. She retired from Friendship Press in 1960 and began massive research projects on African art forms. She traveled to Africa 5 times within a 2-year span, and her photographs and drawings from her trip became a book titled The Decorative Arts of Africa, which was published in 1973. Throughout her life, Jefferson worked in illustration, design, photography. Some say she's best known and remembered for photography, but I would say that even when I've done research into the history of photography, her name and her work doesn't come up, but or that it doesn't come up that readily. But I'm not a researcher necessarily in photography, so there may be some resources on something that I'm not aware of that has a lot of her work. But 300 of her illustrations and photography is in her book, The Decorative Arts of Africa. So I want to start off just taking a look at some of her book cover design that she did when she was at Friendship Press, which she designed several hundreds of book covers and provided illustrations for these books. This first one was one of the first ones she created illustrations for, which was in 1936, We Sing America. Now, I will say for this first book, I'm not clearly sure 100% if she actually designed the cover. I know she did the illustration, but I did want to note that the typography on the cover, this typeface is called Gillies Gothic SB Bold, which was designed by William S. Gillies and released in 2 weights. And both of those weights were released in the year of 1934, as well as 1935 by Bauer. And one thing that sort of happened when this book was released is that the governor of Georgia, Talmadge, requested that this book be burned and never distributed because the book included illustrations that LEJ made that showed Black and white kids playing together. So because of those illustrations, he said that the book would never be sold or bought or distributed in Georgia. So these 2 book covers were designed a little bit under 20 years apart, but I have them here together just to kind of point out obviously similarities in the type that's being used, which is Bernard Modern. Louise E. Jefferson used a lot of, she seemed to really be into old style humanist typefaces, serif typefaces. Her compositions usually are more traditional. Lots of times, especially her work over in the first 20 years, where there's a lot of symmetry. And most of her book covers that she designed for Friendship Press and other publishing houses like Viking Press had her illustrations on the cover. Lucien Bernhardt designed this typeface in 1937, which was released by American Type Foundries. This typeface was designed in response to many popular old style engraving faces of the early 20th century. Friends with All the World. I picked this particular cover because I was intrigued by the capital letters. And when I was trying to find exactly, what font is this, what is it called and where did it come from and who designed it, I sort of came up with nothing. And what I noticed during a lot of the research is that the F, a lot of the Fs that I saw in this particular upright calligraphic style didn't have the loop usually. And then the A, lots of times what happened is that the apex of the A would be a little bit more squared off if it did have a swash kind of coming from the top of the apex. And I also noticed that a lot of those scripts, calligraphic fonts would have the crossbar would kind of the brushstroke from the crossbar would extend past that that vertical stroke of the A to the left. The W I found to be a little bit unique. Lots of times the loop here would extend, a little bit up. And so I wonder, I'm not sure. I think maybe this is, more of an example of Louise's calligraphy. There is something about the consistency of the L's, but if you kind of look at the scale of the D, in Friends and in World, like in World is a lot smaller. So because of that kind of inconsistency, I wonder if this was definitely something that she created with her hand. But it just makes a nice sort of, contrast with the use of a simple sans serif typeface, which she often combines with italics and calligraphic fonts. The world singing songs of praise and work and joy from many lands was another one that I knew that the title type, the main title type was Garamond, which is also an old style serif, which is used in a lot of book design. But the subtitle, I'm really not sure what this secondary typeface is. So here, kind of doing some research, trying to figure out, okay, which typeface is this? What I found is that, is a lot of the fonts would have similar characteristics as far as like the O and the N and some of the other letters, but the S was always extremely different, as well as the P. So if you look at kind of where the stroke ends here, it's a little higher. Here, it's a little, that stroke comes down a lot lower. And then down here, the Linoscript regular, again, it's very similar if you look at the W, but then if you look really closely, you can see how, this little part, the top part of W kind of comes down a lot further and a lot deeper into the negative space, whereas here it stops short. And so again, if you know what this typeface is that's being used here, hey, let me know. And then down here, when I look at the author's name, the way the E is drawn, it looks really similar to some of Louise's calligraphy that I'll show a little bit later. But again, the L is different. You can see the similarities, but then if you look really closely at some of these strokes, the contrast between thick and thins is a lot different. So here on the K, there is more contrast or less contrast. And then here in this K, there's a little bit more contrast and the strokes are a little heavier. Within these borders, I can't say that the design of the cover struck me, but when I started looking closely at the letter forms and how they were put together, the E and the S kind of coming together as a ligature, as well as the E and R. And I know a calligraphy, E being connected to letters that's, sort of behind it is something that happens often. We're used to seeing the T and the H kind of come together in this way as a ligature. But I thought the E and the S and the E and the R's were quite unique in this R. I mean, it almost doesn't even look like an R because the top part, you don't get that arm that curves over that you're used to seeing. And I'm pretty 90% sure that Spanish speaking peoples in the USA, which is the subtitle, is her calligraphy. This A here is from one of her letters that she's written, one of her calligraphic letters that from time to time she will write to people. And I know this sort of style of A is pretty popular in calligraphy, so it's not unique in that sense, but I don't know, something about it, I guess when you kind of look at type for a long time, you start to see things and cues that let you know if something was actually done with the hands and the pen, or whether or not it's something that was digitally produced. So from time to time, Louise would definitely use sans serif typefaces, but again, usually it would be something like Futura combined with a sans serif that was humanistic, right? So you can see here, at the terminal, of the leg of the R. You know, it kind of goes on this angle, which, you know, kind of makes you think of, you know, using a calligraphy pen with a nib that was, you know, with a wedge nib that was kind of flat. And here at the bottom, the author's name, yeah, I could not find a typeface that was, you know, I find online that, or even when I looked in some books, that was this. Again, there were ones that were really close, but the differences that I noticed when I was looking is that the Z's wouldn't have this point. They would be more sort of flat or straight at this part of, I forgot whatever that is called on the Z. So again, that, you know, for me, trying to find what a lot of these, you know, what was used in the original designs is really intriguing to me. And even when I can't find them, that makes me even more curious because a lot of this work, you know, was done a long time ago before, you know, there was an explosion of, you know, digital type design or typefaces being released. So this book covered the Bible and the world, evangelism. I knew for sure, I was like 99.9% sure that this was the font Brandegaris. And maybe it is, but when I, well, it reminded me of that particular font, I should say, because it was designed by Scriptorium, which I believe this type foundry was founded maybe like the 1990s. This book was designed, released, and republished in 1954. Our initials is very similar, and there are a ton of other fonts out there that are similar to this one. But it made me kind of take a pause and really look and see how, you know, the uniqueness of the one that's actually used in the book cover design. If you look closely, the negative space, you know, that creates the texture in a lot of forms is a lot thinner, right? It's almost, you know, kind of a hairline compared to when you look at Brandegaris as well as Eller initials. The other thing that I noticed, this one has, you know, the top part of the serif sort of curves up in a very similar way that doesn't happen in Eller initials. So I knew, you know, it was something that was extremely different. The Christians of Korea, in its simplicity, it's probably one of my favorites. Not that the, not necessarily that the typography is, you know, different or unique in that way, but just how the sort of watercolor-like imagery in the background and the texture, you know, that happens, you know, that makes the shapes really reminds me of the serifs on this old style serif typeface that's being used, which looks like Trebonus SG Roman. There's something about, you know, when I look at the apex of the A at a lot of typefaces that was similar. This was the part that made me realize that a lot of them weren't this one, or I couldn't really figure out which one it was, if it was actually this one or not. This one came really close. It probably is. I mean, some of these are covers that I actually took a picture of. So some of the sort of angles and things gets a little distorted. So sometimes it's hard to really see what a lot of forms are actually like. This one is pretty close, but there's something about, you know, the angle of the O and how the stress is a little different, where the contrast here seems thinner, but on here it's a lot thicker. That could have something to do with, you know, maybe there's a, you know, difference between like the weights. This puzzle of poverty is probably one of, I would say this one and one of the ones earlier, The Story of American Negro, are probably the most visible of book covers that you can kind of see or run across online of LEJ's work. For me, the way the imagery is sort of kind of coming apart or cut up into pieces in a way and you can kind of see that not only the content or the topic or the subject matter that you think may be inside the book, along with the visual sort of connection to the letter forms, comes together, and I don't know, the composition of the book cover is slightly different from some of the more symmetrical ones. And so in the later work, I would say some of the covers that she designed, like after the 1950s and the 60s, even if I go back here using flush left alignment, she's doing a little bit more staggering, leaning more towards asymmetrical layouts, something that you'll see a lot of in some of her program covers that she did for the National Urban League that I'll show you later on. This type is probably a stencil that was designed back in 1936. It's called Ludlow stencil. I found Jeff Levine's favorite stencil, JNL, is very similar. And Jeff Levine did say that this typeface was obviously inspired and modeled after the classic hot metal typeface Ludlow stencil from 1937. For the Action Manual on Christ and the Faith of Men, it's probably one of the few designs by LEJ that uses more of a modernist typeface. And what I mean by that, I make assumptions about people who are listening that most of you all are type enthusiasts, so you know some of this terminology. But basically, what's different about this type from the ones that I showed, a lot of ones I showed before that are more old style, is that there's more contrast in the stroke weight, right? And the serifs are more sharp-like, at the edges. This typeface, this condensed modernist font glamour, was initially released by Langston Minotype in 1948. It is based on Carvinus, which was designed by Imra Rainer. Not going to say much about this one, except just another example of how LEJ seems to always kind of be more fascinated and fond of sans serif typefaces that were humanist. Again, ones that, although they didn't have serif because they were sans serif, but you can kind of see, this kind of contrast, or maybe even lack of contrast in stroke weight. But again, this sort of idea of the hand being seen in a lot of forms is something that she was obviously drawn to and fond of. And here's another example, which is similar to the font Scriptural Bold, which was released in 2006 by Linotype. And I just thought it would be nice to just show a paste up mock-up. I came into graphic design post paste ups, like I never had to do that. I never really experienced it except as an exercise in school, but sometimes it's sort of nice to see the process behind the kind of final design, to kind of see how incredible some of this work that people done before we had desktop publishing is really fascinating. I mean, I even appreciate seeing the, 2/4 of an inch, arrow that's drawn to kind of show how much space to leave on the top and side margin. So I want to talk a little bit about the maps and share some calligraphy, identity, and lettering that LEJ did. After I finished doing this presentation, I actually thought about, especially reflecting on her maps, that this lecture could have been called Calligraphy, Lettering, and Typography of Louise E. Jefferson. So besides designing and illustrating many books, Jefferson did numerous political and cultural maps and pictograms for university presses, Some of them were Oxford, Rutgers, Syracuse, and Columbia. Most pictorial maps of the period intended to appeal to patriotic sentiments to bolster morale. Themes of dislocation and disruption were common in Jefferson's maps. Her skills as a typographer should be added to public records. Her contributions to the field of cartography are only documented in some of the traditional cartography resources. Louise's skill as an illustrator is purposely evident in her cartography. Her maps use a combination of images and symbols. Vivid, lifelike images include major rivers, cities, animals, agriculture, and hospitals. Her representations of prominent people and places are exceptional. Her pictorial maps contain intricate details, ornament illustrations, various occupations, and all populations. They include vignettes of prominent people in politics, music, literature, as historical information about people from Africa, China, and Native Americans. Her cartography includes a sequence of historical tragedies, such as the infamous Trail of Tears. Jefferson maps depict ethnic disparities, racial tolerance, and social injustices, and refute racial stereotypes in the United States and worldwide. She was also committed to health and welfare of children. Her quest to present maps illustrates her vision of cultural vibrancy and national peace. In addition, her pictorial maps yielded a unique visual recognizable flair as a cartographer. And one of the things that sort of drew me into this map is obviously, and I'm probably going to say this over and over again, is the intricacies of the details. This dot, points, here that she made. You can see some of her calligraphy, in here. Her branding and her marks were always on the backs, of her maps. She signed everything. She went through major iterations of identities for her various businesses. One was for graphic design. She had one for photography, as well as one for calligraphy. This map here, Indians of the United States of America, was designed in 1944. This pictorial map was created, It's a comprehensive and beautiful depiction of Native American history. This map contains positive images of Native Americans with stylized Native American motifs of over 100 tribes in the United States and southeastern Canada. The map effectively addresses the diversity of Native American people. It also documents the forced removal from their ancestral land and relocation to Oklahoma along the infamous Trail of Tears. And this is just a close-up. You can see, again, some of the hand lettering, these loops that she likes to make in her W's. Again, usually she uses Futura as the sort of straightforward secondary typeface, but here you can see how she, hand lettered her lettering for the different cities. Africa, a friendship map, was produced in 1945. With her knowledge and taking all these extensive trips to Africa, she created a map with many beautiful aspects of the continent, including a unique affirmative message opposing African stereotypes. And dealing with stereotypes, not only of Africans and also of African Americans, was something that was really dear to LEJ's heart. So she felt like, especially in Africa, when the people of Africa and when their cultures were sort of shown, whether it was on television or in books, she felt that, they were always stereotypical, sort of showing them in these sort of animalistic, barbaric ways, as uncivilized, people. And so she really wanted to sort of show and even I would say, demystify the sort of culture and rituals in Africa. And again, you can kind of see how her letterings and some of her calligraphy and the details of her illustration are represented in these maps. Americans of Negro lineage. This 1946 pictorial map includes an inset with the Black population of the United States during the 1940s. The map displays names, images, places, and people important to Black culture in the United States and Southeastern Canada. In the cartouche, the map contains the title, landmarks, historical notes, and text. And if I just zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see these illustrations that she did, these portraits. This is Harriet Tubman, Walter White, James Weldon Johnson, and some other important figures, Frederick Douglass. And here again, just kind of showing some close up, which is kind of hard to see because this image actually comes from a photo. But again, you can see, some of, all of the lettering in not as much calligraphy in this one as in some of the other ones, but just even the intricate details in these sort of frames, right, cartouche that she makes to house some of the images is amazing. I just often wondered how long it actually took her to create some of these maps. The Bible in All the World from 1947 illustrates the disruption of the Bible around the world via Bible societies and similar organizations. The map provides historical vignettes of important printings, other events in history of the Bible, such as the first American Bible in 1638, the first Indian Bible. There's Jonathan Gabel's translation of St. Matthew in Japanese and printed on wood blocks in Yokohama in 1871. It's also included here. And so again, some of these I'm not quite sure if it's her hand that's in the letter forms, but just a sort of combination and the different styles. So here you have some, black letter and more sort of calligraphic styles here, and here the word of the Lord, O ye nations. And then right here you can see there's typesetting in some of the labeling of the cities. Here, the Indian Ocean, that's some of her calligraphy. And some lettering. In this map, the Anglican Communion in the Caribbean era, not really sure when this was produced, not really sure. I have a whole lot of information on it, but just again, looking at the topography in here, where a lot of this was done and executed by hand and not a whole lot of typesetting in general. This map shows the missionary districts of the Episcopal Church and Diocese of British Province of the West Indies. But she's very consistent about her use of Futura. China, a friendship map from 1948. This pictorial map was made the year before the communist revolution. It shows major cities and rivers and regional products such as silk, soybeans, and tea. Numerous small illustrations depict Chinese people at work or engaged in cultural activities, typical architecture, modes of transportation, traditional dress, and decorative arts. The illustrations contain brief captions with facts about Chinese history and daily lives. And here's another close-up. I mean, there are definitely these stories and these narratives, a sort of sub-narratives that exist within most of her maps. 20th century Americans of Negro lineage. This map was probably one of her, what's the word? Kind of like this was the map where she came up with the idea, the sole concept. She did all the research for this particular map. You know, she was responsible for all the research, the design, the execution, and the drawings. For some of the other ones, a lot of the ideas sometimes of the maps came from some of the universities that she was designing these for, but this one was solely sort of her idea, her creation, her execution, her concept. And the other thing that I really like about this particular map is that for me, it actually really exemplifies every last single one of her talents. You know, here, this bar here on the side is nicely typeset. These photographs and these portraits of these distinguishable African-American people, these portraits of Langston Hughes and Edward Dudley and Carl Brown. She took all of these photographs. These are her portraits that she took of all these people. Obviously, the map includes, you know, like I said before, her typesetting, her illustration, her photography. I want to say this is some watercolor that she did. That's also in the background. And just wanted to show a detail of, again, of some of her calligraphy. And just to go back, you know, like that was done on the borders of, you know, the calligraphy as well as the typesetting was done on the borders of this entire map, which I think is just extraordinary. When I was going through the archives or when I visit the Louise E. Jefferson's archives, I look at, you know, different aspects of her work each time. I ran across her, what you call like her planner, her daily planner, which is the text that you see right here. And I don't know, I just really like looking at even just her handwriting. You know, something that I, you know, learned was, you know, I love how she, you know, how she writes the letter C and the D, her Ds. Every day she would, and I mean every single day in all of her planners, she would write what the temperature was and what type of day it was as far as weather. So here you see it says snow flurries AM 40 degrees. And she would just put that every single day in everything. That, to me, that was just fascinating for somebody like that to document the weather in that way. But she signed, like I said, she signed everything, you know, like look at, you know, her signature, you know, in some of these. And these were all the, you know, some of these are just the different identities that she sort of used as a way to kind of put her stamp, right, on her work. So these are different types of identity that she created for her design business, for her photography business, and for her calligraphy business, just kind of throughout the years and over time. This is a letter that she wrote, some of her calligraphy from 1884. I was really surprised and how I could actually read it. And so this letter is just sort of like, she's like catching up with one of her friends and just kind of somebody who she, I guess, hasn't talked to in a while, it seems. But again, this is 1987. And I don't know, it's just really fascinating to think that somebody would like take the time and sort of write a letter, you know, using their calligraphy skills in this way. But I guess if I was a calligrapher and my handwriting looked like this, I probably would do the same. Her calligraphy business included commissions that she often did for like diplomas and certificates. And so here is one of her drafts from, you know, for a certificate that she was designed that she was working on. So I don't know, it's just like really great to see where the mistakes are, where she feels like there needs to be a little bit more space. But, I guess as a non-calligrapher and admirer of typography, to me, it looks pretty damn good. But just, thinking back to how meticulous she was, I mean, every single day in her planner, she wrote down what the weather was like and the temperature. So I guess that, kind of says a lot about her work ethic, as well as her personality. So the last two bodies of work I'm going to discuss were work that LEJ created for the NAACP as well as the National Urban League. For 40 years consecutively, she created all of the NAACP holiday seals. And she did the same thing for 20 years. She created the program covers for the National Urban League's Beaux Arts Ball. Her designs for these two organizations are examples of her calligraphy and her lettering skills, which were often combined with old style serif, script typefaces, and occasional appearances of sans serif and ornamental display typefaces, similar, I would say, to Davida, and circus fonts with Tuscan serifs. The imagery for the NAACP seals were mainly created with paper cutouts, and that created flat areas of color. This style differed from the more realistic drawings that she did in her book, Decorative Arts of Africa, which I showed on that slide in the beginning of the presentation. So it's kind of interesting to see kind of her range, not only looking through the lens of her typography, but also how she created her imagery. So, for illustrations, sometimes she gets like really detailed, but as you would see in some of these these holiday sales, the use of flat color sometimes, and just kind of mainly focusing on like shapes was really prominent in her work. And so here I'm not gonna maybe go too much in detail of some of this work, but one of the reasons I picked this is sort of this gold kind of metallic printing for greetings, seems really purposely, placed in the sky, makes you think of like, I don't know, like the stars and magicalness of the season, and the perspective in how she created the NAACP, which doesn't necessarily sort of a style that you would think would go with something like this, but I don't know, it actually really works really nicely. I don't know for sure with these stamps, but for this one, I believe these were cut out of paper, kind of like, worked more as like a stencil. Here you would kind of see her, her calligraphy style and the how she exaggerates the, crap, I'm sorry, I'm running out of terminology. The bottoms of the G and the ear here. Here I noticed where, the ear kind of stops right above the R, but in this greetings, it actually kind of covers the R and the E. And I don't know, I just love kind of looking at these forms and these shapes as individual pieces, but they all come together really nicely, as a composition. Again, you can kind of see the cutout paper style here in this book cover for the Crisis magazine. This is just some more paste up examples, just kind of showing some of the behind the scenes work. It's nice to see, her drawing out her, cap height and baseline to draw in her letters and the cutout paper and the coloring. So here, she uses, and if anybody knows what this typeface is, I thought it was the Avida, but it's actually not, because if you look here, the E is like this, at the middle part of the It's not a crossbar, but you know, it has like this, you know, the curl serif, you know, here. But then in hers, you know, this is the actual typeface, but in LEJ's, you know, the E, there's this E that's always slightly different. It's kind of like a double story E in a way. And in all her work where she uses this particular one, it's like that, which is different here. The other thing I noticed is when I looked at the NAACP, the two A's are different too. So again, I'm always sort of questioning and wondering if, you know, sometimes, and I kind of like that tension between not being sure, you know, if it's something that she actually created or if it was actual, you know, typeface that she used here. This is obviously her calligraphy here that's being used. Greetings is a little bit more challenging to read in this one, but that's okay. By me, I love, you know, how the N and the S, the N and the G and the S connects as these like ghostly forms. Kind of reminds me of smoke in a way. Just some more examples. And these are showing some of her cutouts, paper cutouts. And I just love the S, you know, here. It sticks out and it's like an ornament hanging off the tree. I believe this was created, looks like a stencil was used. Here, you can kind of look at the printing of it, or the spraying of the paint, and kind of see. Here, the condensed slab serif at the top. It's a nice combination of the sort of regular weight of it at the bottom, which, you know, they both sort of mimic, you know, this illustration here for me has a relationship to the type here, and the Noel here that's more condensed makes a nice relationship to the vertical ornament to the right. And this one I put in, I'm not really sure. If I had to guess, this one was probably produced more along like later, maybe like 1979. Thought it was interesting, the contrast in the black and white. There's definitely this simplicity in how she approaches the imagery here. And again, when it comes to the type in the NAACP, you know, there are typefaces, you know, sorry, there are fonts that I found that were similar, but not in combination with the squareness of the C and the P. So this last section is the covers that she did for the National Urban League. And it's just amazing to me that, you know, again, she did these for 20 years and they consist of her, you know, lettering she done with paint. This was from 1953. These, you can kind of see some remnants, if you remember, from the poverty puzzle book from earlier, book cover where she used the stencil typeface here. These two are circular. This one is from 1966. This one's from 67. Here, you know, these instruments kind of look like letter forms, you know. It's definitely has this sort of psychedelic sort of vibe to it that's definitely of the time. This kind of Western, you know, wood block, slab, condensed type along the side, like all these things that you just wouldn't think would actually go together in one composition. But here it's something, I don't know. And then it's, you know, circus type, you know, here. All these different elements that are typographic styles that don't seem right to seem right here. Again, this type keeps showing up everywhere. She definitely wasn't afraid to mix typefaces. So apparently she didn't have a type teacher to tell her that she couldn't use more than one typeface in one composition. And, you know, just seeing the process again, how she would draw these letters, cut out paper to put on top to get that sort of dimensionality in the letter forms. Again, just the combination of, you know, I know when I was in school, I would be told that, oh my God, this is so busy, all this different stuff going on. But who cares? You know, everybody doesn't have the same sort of perspective when it comes to design and layering and having different styles and things come together. So I think that's the thing that I appreciate, like her work. It's just there's a boldness to it and a confidence that I really admire. And again, all the different combinations, and you can see in these covers where her approach, you know, this is some of her later work. This is from 1992, where the compositions get a little bit more complex, and there's a little bit more movement, and sort of moved away from the kind of static, you know, symmetrical symmetry, and this sort of just, you know, using old style sort of typefaces. And here, you know, by the 1990s, this is probably like 10 years before she actually died. I mean, you know, she retired in 1960. I would say retired in quotes from Friendship Press when she was doing the book design there. But she still worked after that until the day she died, basically. And that is it. Thank you.
Tasheka, thank you so much for sharing your amazing research with us. I mean, this was incredible. We have a lot of questions here for you, so I'm going to start reading them out, and then I will type in your answers into the Q&A as we answer the questions. So also, people, you can upvote questions that you would like to see answered. The first one on the list is from Mariva. And Mariva asked, did LEJ also design the map of the US with the international flags?
I haven't come across that one, but that's not to say that she didn't. I haven't seen every last single map that she has designed, but I'm glad you're taking this down, Grindel, because I would like to go to the Amistad Center to see if they actually have it in their collection. So,
You got it.
yeah, thanks for that question.
Okay. Let's see. Robert Williams asked, who published these maps?
Oh, various universities published them, like Oxford, Columbia. A lot of them was actually also published by Friendship Press. So she did a lot of those maps actually when she was working there. It's sometimes unclear whether or not some of them were a part of her job when she was there, because she did, even when she was working there, she did a lot of freelance work. So yeah, a lot of them were published by university presses.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, actually, because she was so prolific. In fact, I have an adjunct question for that. Sorry for butting in here, Q&A, but did she have a team supporting her when she did those maps?
Not that I know of. As far as I know, to be honest, that she usually worked alone. She didn't necessarily have like a team of people. And there was, she's so funny. There was this quote from her. It would lead me to think that she was soloist. For one, I looked through a lot of her correspondence, and it didn't seem like there was ever anybody that she was doing work with. The other was that she thought that she didn't have much advice to give to young people, and she would say stuff like, just do the work that you love, and that kind of stuff. So but that made me think that she didn't have like younger people working for her or anything like that. As far as I know, she was like a one-man show, one woman show. Sorry.
Wow. Mariva clarifies here. I see in the chat, Mariva asks, says it's the one shown in the slide with the Spanish speaking countries, the one with the American flag. So
was the question about the American, wait, what was the question again?
the question was, did Mariva, no, did LEJ also design the map of the US with the international flags?
All the maps that was shown that's all her work.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, to that. Sorry, I think I misunderstood the question.
Okay.
I thought she was talking about a different map.
Yeah, I did. It wasn't clear, but now we got clarity. So thank you. Let's see. What else do we have? Robert Williams asked, did she also design the calligraphic logos for Friendship Press and Fleming H. Revel? I
think she did, but I'm not exactly sure. But that F, you're talking about the FP, right? Yeah, I'm more than sure she did, but I haven't found any. In her archive, there wasn't anything that I discovered that showed like that particular logo on its own. But I'm more than sure she probably did, because it looks a lot like her work, like her style, I guess.
Exactly. Okay. So we got more research is needed, but likely. Ben Z asks, and also Katra Kasameji, whose name I apologize, I probably butchered, both ask, have her maps or her total work been collected in a book anywhere? They make up a fascinating set of cultural cartography.
So the answer to that question is that no, there isn't a book of a collection of these maps. The second part is the only book that exists with her work is the one that she wrote, is the Decorative Arts of Africa, which it includes her illustrations as well as her photography. But I would say that creating a book of her work is on my list of things to do, to write a book of her work. Probably several volumes, because she's so prolific in how much stuff she did. I would love to do that.
Okay, Tasheka, you better free up some time in your schedule, because we are all waiting for that book. Yes, we are. Everyone is responding favorably to that suggestion in the chat. Also, yeah, her calligraphy. So I guess if her maps aren't somewhere as a collection, her calligraphy isn't either.
Well, okay. So her maps are actually at the Amistad, but they're not like published and produced in like an actual publication. So you can see them at the Amistad Research Center at Tulane. They're there. But yeah, there isn't like and you can find them online as well. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, does that the research center have a website with those online, or someone else has digitized them?
Okay, so no, they haven't digitized anything. But you can find them. I can just maybe after this give you some more links.
Oh yeah.
But they are online. You can view them online. There are several websites that have them. And like I said, in order to see them in person, actually, there are places I found on Amazon too. Like if you wanted to purchase them, you can order them on Amazon as well, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
Some of them.
So let's see, we got a bunch more questions, but that's okay. We have time. Mariva, who comments that her projects continually challenge the dominant racial and ethnic narratives of the time, wants to know a couple things. Did she design the entire map and individual elements of the Native American map?
So let me go back to that one. So for those, for the maps, they're credited. She has the credit for the illustrations, for the design of them. And on the back of most of them, there is either like one of her stamps of her name. So to my understanding, yeah, she's the one that did the illustrations, the lettering, and basically all the graphic elements for those maps, as well as actually putting them together.
Do you know, I'm just curious, the distribution of these maps, how were they disseminated? How many were printed? Were they sold?
That I don't know how many of them were printed. I think I saw maybe 1,000. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious how they, you know, where they were sold, how they were disseminated, were they even sold, were they giveaways? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of them that were produced or that were commissioned from like universities were used like in different departments like geography or like history or anthropology, but I'm not sure as far as them being kind of sold to the public in that way or distributed in that way. I'm not sure.
Okay, okay, more research needed.
Yeah.
Did Mariva ask, did she also design the colorful puzzle pieces on the Puzzle of Poverty book cover?
Yes. The imagery that's on that cover.
Mhm.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, and Robert Williams asks, I wonder, did she use Letraset for some of the more ornate typefaces?
I wondered that too. But I haven't seen in any of her there's a lot of her like pay stubs and like tracings and pay stubs, process work. I didn't see any Letraset, but I'm thinking for some of the ones that are more difficult to find that maybe she did. These questions are really great because they give me things to kind of look for more specifically when I go back to the research center. So that's something I wonder too, and I think maybe she did.
I see Stephen Cole's popping up in the Q&A saying most of the typefaces
They
weren't
weren't available, right?
available in
Yeah,
transfer type. So that
that's
would,
true.
yeah, I mean, at least at those early days. Stephen Coles asked, speaking of Stephen Coles, how the material got to the Amistad Research Center. Did she or her family donate it?
So here's the thing. She supposedly, the story is that a neighbor of hers donated her full estate because she wasn't married and she never had any kids. And so that's what I was told, is that a neighbor donated all her artwork to the Amistad Center, which I think that's something, and I don't know how that person knew to do that. But that's the story that they told me. I think that perhaps her partner, and I don't know for sure, probably donated the work to her, to the Amistad Center. They said neighbor, but I think perhaps it may have been a partner that she had that did that on her behalf.
Okay, good for the neighbor, whoever they were. We're very grateful. Neighbor. Let's see. Pam Galvani asks, do you know where she first learned calligraphy? That would give you some great leads on her contacts for book design. Definitely she would have known Jeannie Wong and Arnold Bank. I wonder if she first learned at Art Students League in NYC. Do you know?
She learned from her father, as far as I know. That's where she learned calligraphy, because her father was a calligrapher for for the United States Treasury Department. That's who taught our calligraphy.
What does a calligrapher do in the U.S. Treasury Department? That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find any information on him, but
wow.
That's where she learned it from.
So you don't know if she got any more training after that? It was her father's.
She did. She studied fine arts and graphic design at Hunter College and at Columbia, but not at those places. They mentioned how she studied like printmaking and commercial art and more traditional art, like painting and things like that. But none of it stated that she studied calligraphy at those places, and she didn't graduate from any of those places like that. So.
Okay. Robert Williams clarifies that lettering on paper, money, and coins would have been done.
Yeah, that's probably what he was doing. It was for the mint.
Okay, let's see. So Stephen asks, maybe it's a little bit of the same question that I had. How were the maps distributed? But then he specifies, are they always as foldouts in books that were published by the press?
So here's the thing. They were, I'm not sure if they accompanied books, but they were all distributed, folded. Like you can kind of tell, like when I go there, you can see the creases and the actual map. So they were sort of distributed in that way. Whether or not they were attached or associated with particular publications, that I'm not sure of. But I know a lot of them were actually released by Friendship Press, which is hard to find information about them right now because they have they're not the same basically anymore. So yeah, I would like to know how.
And the old records are gone or lost or something.
But I can say that I haven't dug a lot into that specific, like her maps is something that I've always been interested in, but over the years it's just sort of been more kind of grabbing, the more that I learn about her. Like for instance, she has like 5,000 photographs there, so there's just so many different aspects of her work, that is there, and sometimes it's overwhelming. So I haven't had a chance to like do a deep dive into one particular area per se in that way. So the maps is still something that's kind of new for me in general.
Okay, let's see. We got a couple more questions here. And folks, we do have a few more minutes. So if you have a question that's burning, please put it in the Q&A and we'll try to put it out. Ben Z asks, is the apparent collection at Harvard Radcliffe duplicative of the material at Tulane? Have you had a chance to dig into that? I'm so glad you're committed to this research project. You can tell he wants that book.
No, I'm not familiar with the collection at Harvard. And if there is a duplicate, that's news to me, because as far as I know, that Tulane is the only place that actually has her full estate, but it's possible.
Oh, okay. Ben's popped a link to that in the chat, so we can check that out later. But yeah, that would be very cool. Okay, let's see. Anonymous asks, who are some current African American graphic designers whose work you admire?
Wow.
You could start with type designers, maybe, because I know you have some typefaces in your lecture that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was obvious, but using some Trey Stills as well as Joshua Darden, those two typefaces I used throughout the lecture. So definitely inspired by a lot of their work. There's some work that, people that are doing in regards to not necessarily design and making in that way, but there are people who work that who are doing work sort of with diversity and inclusion and things like that, currently that I admire, like Kelly Walters, exhibition work that she's done. I've always liked the work of Gail Anderson. And honestly, if I admit, like, Louise E. Jefferson is probably the biggest inspiration for me personally, because she kind of did everything. She was kind of like a jack of all trades, but not like a person who was just trying to dibble and dabble into different things, but she actually was pretty good at everything that she did. And so I kind of struggle with kind of wearing multiple hats sometimes. Like, I don't, like, for one, she didn't like being called a photographer, but somebody that has a whole body of, work, and even have a book with her photography in it. Like, she was adamant. And I think a lot of it had to do with, she sort of admired those professions. And so she didn't want to be called a photographer because she wasn't formally trained. And I kind of struggle with that myself, right? Like, I don't want to be called an illustrator because I haven't been formally trained as an illustrator, or, wear some of these names or some of these hats. But there's, work of Art Sims. I like his movie posters that he did a lot of, by Spike Lee. I'm inspired by the work that Cheryl Miller has done. Some of her past work, like she done a lot of lettering for a lot of corporations. Like her identity work, she done the first logo for like BET. And just the work that she does around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I find inspiring. There are a lot of people that I can go on and name, but yeah.
Okay, that's a great answer. As Packley, and it really speaks to is, I mean, maybe it's because she was a woman, or maybe it's imposter syndrome, but the story you told about not wanting to list herself as a photographer despite having taken so many photographs, that's I don't know. I feel like we see that before, and people need to take more ownership and feel more comfortable doing that of their own skill sets, and but I also see I hear where she's coming from on that, because she probably people would have said, you're not a photographer, you haven't been formally trained.
Yeah, but she did a lot of photo work. She was really interested in like sports. So she was a swimmer back in her day. So she would go around and take photography at different like sporting events. And then, her travels, there's a lot of photography. But also she came around the time during the Harlem Renaissance and in New York. And so she rubbed noses with, Lena Horne, and she was next door neighbors with Arthur Ashe, like all these people. And so she carried, if you like some of the photos that I had in my presentation, you would notice she always had a camera in her hand, always. And she kept the camera at the door in our house, and she picked it up and took it with her everywhere she went. So, yeah.
All right, one last question here from Lorena Howard Sheridan. Says, wonderful research, Tasheka. Thanks for sharing this. I wonder, how do you find that this kind of research influences your own design practice?
Yeah, I think I kind of alluded to it a little bit before. She wore multiple hats. And I think, there's a way over the past few years that I feel like my practice has expanded. So for a long time, I just kind of put myself in a box, and it's like, I'm a graphic designer, but, I'm interested in, as Brenda knows, doing a learning type design on a more professional level, and more, kind of really gaining that skill as opposed to just, kind of dibble and dabbling in that. But also embracing writing in my work, as well as being more consistent with research. And I think that, although she's, Louise E. Jefferson is known for, the visual work, but, if you think about those maps and that book that she did, that's a ton of research, so there's the writing, You know, there's the illustration, there's the documentation, there's the design, you know, so she's definitely my muse. You know, sometimes I feel like she's like sitting here on my shoulder.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tasheka. That was amazing. Let me just wrap this little sentence up here and then give you a round of applause. Thank you, Tasheka, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you'll tune in 2 weeks for the calligraphy type smackdown between Laura Meseguer and Uriol Miro. Okay, have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks again, Tasheka.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
True pleasure. And we have some great questions too, I have to say.
Yeah, I'm happy that I get to see them again and you saved them.
Yes, absolutely. All right, signing off now. Happy Tuesday.